back. I know some of you wanted him to come back, but actually it's Oliver Reichenstein. He's the owner of Information Architects, and he's known as one of the best, which is known as one of the best design agencies in the world. He launched Information Architects in 2005 and became known for various articles on web typography, user experience design, and the web trend map. IA has also developed its own products, from the IA template for WordPress to writing software, IA Writer for the Mac and iPad. And IA has also been involved in a series of news sites, including Knight-Mozilla news partner Zeit Online. And they produced the HTML5 tablet-friendly version of Zeit.de. So today, Oliver will be sharing his perspectives on design and the news and the future of the news. So welcome, Oliver. And I will turn my camera off and pass you the.
Yeah, hello everybody. This is actually the first time where I talk about mostly about my past experience with news, because I've been asked to. Usually I try to think ahead. Yeah, I have a cam, but I don't know how to switch it on. Where is that cam?
I think you should be able to switch it now. I just switched it.
Oh, share my camera. Here we go. Okay. Press play. Can you see me? No. Can you see me or no?
No,
Probably
I'm not seeing you yet.
No, I just see like a blue big button in my share your webcam window.
Did you press the play button on the left, the bottom left?
Okay. I pressed the play button. Okay. Yeah, maybe it's better if you don't see me. It's been a tough day. Anyway, I leave it running. Maybe it's going to come back. So anyway, yeah, it's the first time where I go through my whole experience with news. What's happening with this presentation here? Because I've been asked to, and it's been quite interesting. I was surprised how many news sites we've actually designed. I started, at a little design agency here in Zurich and was hired by Interbrand, big branding agency, to present, to prepare a pitch presentation for the T-Online browser. And what we came up with back then was, we should have tabs. If a browser had tabs, there would be less of a mess with different session windows, and T-Online liked it so much that they said, okay, we're not going to design this browser with the tabs, we're going to wait with that. But let's redesign our whole portal. We can use ideas like that. And then I was sucked into, a 4-year redesign project that involved the whole digital identity of Deutsche Telekom. And at that time, they partnered with Bayern München and the Bild Zeitung, and we did all this design 4 years. Of Deutsche Telekom. T-Online was a big universe of applications and portals and web TV, experimental stuff. And I got really tired of the color pink. If you know Deutsche Telekom, is they put their branding card on the color pink. They call it magenta. And I was really tired of working in the same environment with all these branding guys where I learned a lot, but I wanted to see something new, and I went to Japan. What I learned in the first big project, that was really 4 years of designing, at the time, the biggest news portal for Germany, was that it was not about Photoshop, but about your political skills. So understanding the processes, how newsrooms work, and understanding the power battles, understanding who are the stakeholders and how to talk to these different stakeholders. That was really, really important. So I learned to compromise. So when you're a designer and you have a certain ideal of how your product should look and work, you're actually confronted with a literal nightmare when you deal with news organizations. especially back like 10 years, they really had hardly any understanding of how the medium works. They had all these really, really old ideas. I mean, I always have to smile when I hear people complaining about news organizations nowadays. If you look at news organizations 10 years ago, they had literally no clue how the web works. And so you learn to compromise. And by learning to compromise, with the internal politics of a news organization, you understand that, maybe that's not just the business side of what we do is about compromises, but also the technological side and even, the actual design part is all a big compromise. That was a big lesson for me in 4 years of Deutsche Telekom, is that I have to find, my job mainly is to find a compromise between design, business and technology. It was also the first time where I was confronted with an audience of millions of people where suddenly, 5% that don't have JavaScript is a big, big, big issue, where suddenly, you create a shitstorm of anger if you exclude 5% from what you do. So, it was a big lesson in engineering, it was a big lesson in politics. Next project was, Geigenpot is a completely unknown entity. It's a job site and a news site for foreigners in Japan. They were kind enough to hire me, even though I had no Japanese skills whatsoever. And I worked on this 1.5 years, and I could pretty much do whatever I wanted. And so what I did was, get away from all the compromises and try to find out, what's new, what could be done with a portal site where there's not so much politics involved, where I can take every decision I wanted. And what I was exploring mainly at the time was screen typography. I had great respect for people with a traditional design training back here in Switzerland. I'm actually not a trained designer. I studied philosophy, and I started designing myself because I was not happy with the classic design guys that were working in our team back then, and slithered into that role of a designer, and basically got my design training on the fly. And working as a product manager of a small company back there in Japan, I had complete freedom to experiment. It was also a time where, everybody was talking about Web 2.0 and, Flickr grew quickly, and it was not called social media back then, but Web 2.0. And, I was exploring all the different options that there are suddenly on the web, that, were always buried in some way in the medium, but suddenly I felt something is happening, and I decided to start my own business. That was at the end of 2005. First, I just blogged. I continued to explore, how this medium works, how screen typography works mainly. I read a lot of books, and I looked how people react to different kinds of writing. I experimented with A/B testing. Started a couple of aggressive, controversial discussions about, astroturfing. There was this moment where PR companies started to try to influence online discussions, that big exploration was sort of a campaign for information architects, and then a big Swiss publishing house called Tamedia discovered IA through the web trend map and through all the blog posts, and said, why don't you make a big concept for us, because we're redesigning our main flagship news site called Tagesanzeiger, and we want to make a couple of experiments with the smaller entities we have. And the first one was Das Magazin. It was a flash site that had basically no traffic, a big exposure. It's a magazine with 800,000 readers per week, but their website only had, traffic about 6,000 or so. And so, first what we did was studying the information architecture of it, and we found that there was a huge gap between the mental model and the content model of that website. The mental model is, what the user expects, and the content model is what you have to offer. And the mental model was the user expected to have the magazine online, or at least all the text that they can read every week online. And the content model was you can buy physical copies of the magazine, and once in a while there's an article there. And so what we said is you should actually try to open it up, make a wiki out of this magazine and let people edit it, because there's a lot of passionate readers of that magazine. It's a very high quality magazine, and it will be really interesting to involve the public there really actively in the content production, in the editing process, and in the whole circle of the magazine, and use the website not just to promote the magazine, but actually also to create the magazine. These were, my fantastic ideas before I had a concrete knowledge of a traditional print publishing entity. And that experiment, having a magazine as a wiki, was a complete failure, because journalists just couldn't handle the markup code of the wiki markup code. It was just completely impossible to teach them how that works. So we did a really good job still on the information architecture, because what we did is we put every magazine in full, all the texts we put there. I actually personally put in a year of magazines into the system because the journalists couldn't handle it. Back then, still 2006, 2007, the whole discussion part was not as messed up as now. Nowadays, I really think that the comment section of newspapers, if it's not managed properly, is completely useless. And the magazine had quite some success in terms of traffic, but it was a complete miscalculation to use a technology that was way over the head of traditional journalists. And the other problem was that there was no budget for someone to manage this site. So, business-wise, it was a complete failure, and or business strategically, it was a complete failure. It was a complete failure technologically. We quickly changed that system then to WordPress, because that is a system that even journalists can use. And but design-wise, it was a big success, and traffic-wise also it worked pretty well. It was a good first step. We did another experiment with an old publication of the same house, where we said, okay, what if users create the agenda, and it's all user-driven. If users decide what's on the top page, if users drive the discussion really strongly. And the problem there was that it was an invitation to trolls. It grew really quickly. It became really popular. It was actually quite an important voice here for some time, for a couple of months here in Switzerland. And then the trolls were all over the place and basically took down the site. It still runs, and it has a little fan base, but as an experiment to open up a new site completely to the readership was a mistake. In retrospect, I would say it can work if you have a very, very, very well-trained, editorial that takes care of the community. But we learned back then in 2007, you can't have a user-driven news site without very, very strong controls. It was my first experience also with, mass and power, the whole dynamic that exists on the web when masses collect, because the whole trolling and the whole aggression also led to to swarms of people invading the website and creating massive psychological power, psychological pressure for those who manage that site, mainly on the side. So yeah, it was a big lesson in how the web works on the user side if you give the user too much control. And it was a good training also for the big redesign, because it was also an experiment. Both projects were basically an experiment for the big redesign, where we found a good balance with editing processes for the content management, and with user integration. It was Tagesanzeiger. Tagesanzeiger was not the only newspaper that we redesigned in that project. It was basically 6-7 big newspapers that used one common content management system. What we managed there was really to exceed expectations, and you could see that in the numbers. Top is how many readers we have. Most of these page views we generate with IA website, most of those are actually through news sites, Krone site, the whole Newsnet's Tagesanzeiger network. And if you look at Tagesanzeiger in the middle, when we started, we had 4.5 million visits per month, and now in 2011 it's 14 million. Now that, of course, has to do also with the investment in the newsroom and with the brilliant work that they've been doing there, mainly with the goal of increasing traffic and page views. That was their strategy. But you can see the same development also with Zeit Online. Basically, most of our news projects have a strong growth because we focus so much, on the numbers, and also our whole design process is not focused on prettiness, but on focusing by focusing on increasing by improving the processes and integrating processes into the way the website works as a whole. The next project was Krone. From then on, suddenly we got a lot of requests. Still, until then, we were not really known that much, but from then on we got a lot of requests from big newspapers because they've seen the traffic numbers. Krone is actually the biggest news site in Austria. There, our learning was, until then we actually talked to the stakeholders, especially, of course, in Switzerland. It's a small country, you quickly know who's in charge, but Austria is already further away, especially if you sit in Tokyo. And our learning there was, that if you do a redesign of a news site, you actually need to talk to the CEO, because there are so many instances. Again, it's a political learning. So many stakeholders. Everybody wants to be in the scroll area, and in the end, you don't make good compromises, but foul compromises. So I learned there was we have to engage much more with the management, with the top management of a news site to be successful. It was still a good project, and it was successful. But in retrospect, we wish we had more contact to top management in that project. One big limitation with all news sites is, of course, that you have to start building the grid with ads. That's the atomic entity of every news design grid. That's just the standard formats, right? At the same time, this is really the biggest pain. Here is an example of the New York Times with and without ads, and all the things that are supposed to push the page views of a website. And even though it's a crappy layout on the right side, I'd much rather read the layout on the right side. Now, if you know the processes, how they work, and if you know the business processes, maybe there is a way actually to go different, to take different paths. Here on the right side, here you see a comparison between a website that is focused on page views. On the left side is the design focused on page views. On the right side is a website that's focused on user experience, on reading experience. And that was one of the, experiments we made on our blog, saying, what if instead of building a paywall, you build a business class where people can decide for themselves whether they finance the news process by, being distracted and not clicking on ads, or eventually clicking on ads, or by paying a small yearly fee, and the feedback was really good. We did that actually as so often. We did that as a research job for one of our clients who was curious about this idea, was curious to see how our readership reacts. We do that a lot. We also tested, for example, the first targets on Tiger Designs by making a fake design of the Washington Post, because we knew, of course, if we show how we redesign the targets on Tiger, the competition would know, and at the same time nobody would care because it's a Swiss newspaper. And we got great feedback from a lot of very competent people for these designs, and that helped the client a lot. So actually, watch out whenever we write a blog post. Sometimes there is a secret intent there, or it's linked to a client project that we do. Then the big project, Zeit Online, where we learned, a lot about how to improve the process between agency and client. The initial idea of Zeit Online was, the Zeit is has a very big format, and it's part of its identity. We want to have a layout that mirrors this, big spirit, that mirrors the class of Zeit Online, but the limitations we had because of the standard ad forms and the browser compatibility issues and monitor sizes forced us to rethink the newspaper layout, and we said, why don't we make a flexible layout that adjusts to the browser size? That's now known as responsive design, but at that time our idea was just basically to mirror the visual and the cultural quality of the Zeit newspaper. And by doing so, we were already also drawn into all the difficulties and all the advantages that responsive design has, and that is that it would work in different formats. That you can browse it on a cell phone if you want to, or you can have it open as a side window all the time. And by doing so, we were forced from the beginning to design everything in HTML. So we made a lot of quick fireworks mock-ups to have a general idea of the direction and show how the site would scale in the different formats. And then I think after maybe 3 weeks of design work, we said, okay, from now on we do everything in HTML. And that was the first time where we did this so radically. We used to fiddle with the CSS at the end of a project, but we never really developed the whole design based on HTML. What we did is we used a WordPress installation and connected it to their existing content management system, so we could work with real contents. That was also a request of the very web-savvy management team there at Zeit Online. They said, we don't want any of these beautiful pictures and any of these, cut down text. So the layout looks perfect when it's in Photoshop, but then when we use it for real, it doesn't work. We want our actual text that we have right now. And that was one reason why, the Zeit Online redesign was such a success, because it was very realistic from the beginning in both, the conditions where we developed the design and, the contents that we actually used for that design. I went to Hamburg for 2 weeks and worked with Wolfgang Blau and Fabian Mohr, who were really the top decision makers in that project for 2 weeks, and we fiddled with the CSS just right there in the office, and that made the design process extremely fast. I think I went there mid-January for 2 weeks, and as far as I remember, I think mid-February the whole design was done. So after 2 weeks, we decided how it looks, how it works, what typography. We had a couple of templates that we were sure these templates work as they're supposed to, and then the rest was just basically handicraft. Of course, when you get to other pages, you have to make small correction on the initial templates, but working in HTML was incredibly efficient, and since then we do that always. So that was a big learning, was a big project. It was the biggest project for us so far, and it still is one of the things we're most proud of, because from A to Z it was just perfect. It was perfect from the moment we first pitched for the project. I came into the room and Mr. Blau said, let's not waste time with presentations, let's talk, because since you're in Tokyo we'll not have too much time to talk, and I can assess much better, if we work well together, if we talk or not. If we talk and not if you just, present. And, it was, I can say like love at first sight, because I prefer that kind of setup much more to the usual, ad agency madman thing where you go to client and you say, and this is the great idea and this is the way that you have to go. Since then, actually, I always say, like, I don't know what you should do. I first have to talk to you. We then, worked on iPad stuff last year. We took on a job that nobody knows. That's the Süddeutsche Magazin for iPad. We did the design concept for that. At the same time, we started working on our writer. We finished that about, I think, in June, more or less in June. And then we gave it to the technology to finish it, and I think that the technology was done with it a month or two ago. So we, of course, we didn't, communicate that we were working on that because it was still in the works. And there's actually a second iPad application, new iPad application that we designed that is still in production that I can't talk about. And the second reason was that as soon as we launched the writer, we noticed that it's probably not good business-wise for us to push the whole iPad news design thing. If the client wants something that is close to the paper experience, so all these things like, the reader wants, a beginning and an end to his reading, and, it has to look and feel the same, and you have to have this, paper metaphor, and maybe, we can have similar revenues as we do with our, paper edition. So this whole approach to news, we noticed as soon as we had the writer for iPad out that this could actually be, harmful for us as a business, because we always said we're not just designing, we're focusing on numbers. We're trying to improve your business processes. We're trying to make you more money. And we knew that it doesn't work because we were one of the few agencies that had direct insights into the actual sales numbers. So when Writer for iPad came out, it quickly climbed to number one in France. It quickly climbed to number one in Finland, in Switzerland, in the USA. And unfortunately, it was just quickly, but we still knew how many iPad apps you can sell, both in terms of revenue as well as in terms of numbers, to be number one in different countries. And we noticed that, for instance, in Switzerland, being number one selling iPad apps, you sell exactly 60 applications. So we knew this is not a business model for news. Same thing in France. In France, I think it's about 270 apps to be number one. Now, if you're Le Monde and you invest $120,000 to $1 million into an iPad production, and then you sell not even 270, but maybe 20, maybe 40 apps a day, actually this is a massive, massive misinvestment. And that's what we've been telling our clients since then. And this is why we have not been working on traditional iPad applications for, I'm trying not to read the comments right now. I'll do that later. That's why we've not been doing iPad applications for news organizations as long as they are really in that let's mirror the paper edition. So another big learning was kind of hard because we were quite excited about the design, possibilities, and also the many other things you could do with an iPad application. I have to pay attention to not tell you too much because we have another project actually that we're working on. I think there is a way to do news with the iPad, but it's not a traditional paper thing. But I can't tell you too much about it yet. What was that here again? Yeah, so one thing we did for the Knight, and interesting enough, this project happened at the same time as we did the Süddeutsche application. Zeit Online said from the beginning, they said, no, what is much more interesting for us is an HTML adaptation of Zeit Online and not an application. Let's invest in that. And so we worked on that HTML adaptation for a couple of months. And, compared to the traditional hard-coded news application, this was actually quite a success. People loved to use it. The server had a little bit of trouble in the beginning because, they delivered quite big pictures and, there was quite some traffic on this website. But this is pretty successful. This also, the experience with the Zeit Online HTML adaptation for iPad also led to, my belief that the best news application right now is the browser, because you can actually work with the information when you have a browser. It deserves the name application. When all you can do is, is pushing something on Twitter or, sending something via the email application or, flipping through pages of information, that's not really an application. That is, a reader. The thing is, when it comes to design, clients are often a little bit deceived because they expect us to innovate with layouts and with, different typefaces and to come up with something that looks completely different. And we always have to explain to them, you actually have 2 or 3 possibilities. You can go with a multi-column layout that mirrors the traditional newspaper, or you can go more into a block direction. There is an alternative with a more magazine layout, but that always requires a lot of editorial energy if you do that. But what you should do in any case is you have to try to reduce information. You have to try to make the pictures as big as possible, because that works, because that actually really gets the attention you want. If you cram the page with as much information as possible, just so all the stakeholders are happy, actually the user will not be happy. And that's always the same design challenge. The design challenge is to explain to the different stakeholders that they have to hold back, that they have to help us making pictures bigger and trying to achieve body text size where the user is happy to actually read the article, because that's the goal. They often forget that the article is not only the entry point, but also the actual goal of a reading, of an interaction process in a news site. So then we did another couple of news sites. Salzburger Anzeiger is something that is in the works in Austria. I hope they're not angry that I tell that, but as you go along, you get a little bit more philosophical. One thing I say in every project, and one thing that we also learned in depth, again with the writer, is that when you design something, don't don't think too much about aesthetic proportion, and don't just use your eye, but look what your hand is doing. Because that's the critical part of user interface design. If you have to use your hand too much, if you have to move your hand too much from keyboard to mouse and back, that is a bad design. So, the traditional dichotomy is between scrolling and clicking. Every client wants that carousel because they say, no, then you have a lot of information in the visible area, and all the user needs to do is click that little button, and then he gets the next story and the next story, and he doesn't need to scroll. People still afraid to scroll, or people that own websites, they still, against scrolling. People that visit websites, they love scrolling much more than taking, the hand off the keyboard and moving the mouse and pointing it to that little button that says next. Figuring out in the first place how that carousel works, because every carousel works in a different way. And so it's not about shaping surfaces, but it's about shaping processes, and shaping processes both on the user side and, in the back end of the application down to the processes in a company. Golem 2011, here are also a couple of other examples to show how, at first sight, when you look at the actual surface design, our choices are always pretty similar because you just don't have so much choice. Lately we started experimenting a little bit more with Typekit and using other typefaces, but that proved to be quite a nightmare actually in the case of Golem. Golem is a tech site with quite a nerdy audience, and some of them have old funky computers, and that Droid serif font that renders different, not only different browsers, but on different platforms, and you end up wasting a lot of time and energy optimizing those, the font performance for these different devices. It's always good to design something for a German audience. It's also interesting to see the different response you get in different cultures. It's always good to design for a very, very critical, very, very nerdy, very, very technical audience, because you learn so much. Not only, from the critique, but also defending your choices when people are so hardcore, when it comes to accessibility and, web standards. That's always a good training camp. Right now, I hope also that I'm not telling too much. We're actually working a little bit more with TV stations as well. We've been working for quite some time on an Australian TV station called SBS. That, design is in the works. I can't show you anything just yet, but it's a very, very different kind of beast when you go from print media to, TV or radio, where your job is to put a medium that has nothing to do with the internet into the internet. It's extremely challenging to make this work, even though websites are used on screen. It's a completely different use pattern, that was a big challenge. I can't tell you too much about the learnings just yet, as well. Because of our NDA situation, but I think we found a couple of good solutions to integrate other forms of media into the web environment. That's the last sheet. One more time, what we've mainly learned in these 12 years was about the processes. Start with wireframes. Start with talking to your client, really understanding their needs. If you don't, you can't explain user needs to them either. And use whiteboards and paper in the beginning, just to get your idea out, to get your sketches out. Use a little bit of fireworks to get, an idea for the look and feel, but don't spend too much time there. Get into the HTML prototype as quickly as possible and try to reduce, the hand interaction, try to reduce, the thinking necessary for using a website. Do all the information design in HTML. It's so much easier. All you need is to know a little bit of CSS, and then you can quickly change all the headlines from serif to sans serif from uppercase to lowercase. It's so much a better design tool than anything out there. Some people work with InDesign because it also allows them to have a certain, like a CSS approach to design where they can quickly change all the headlines. But the trouble with InDesign is that it renders text much too beautifully. So when you work for a long time in InDesign, you have a completely, polished feeling for your website, and things look pretty way too quickly. I like Fireworks for that matter because it renders type in such a crappy way that whenever you put it in HTML, you have a pleasant surprise. So actually using Fireworks, something that renders your stuff really badly, is good because, you're up for a good surprise and not for a bad surprise as when you use these, more professional, more filigrane design tools. So and that's 12 years in. How many minutes did I speak now? 40 minutes? Oh, incredible. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, I'll try to leave more space for Q&A if you have time. Okay.
Great. Yeah. No, thank you so much.